Subscribe to Infidelity Tales Lab. Now, let's begin. The Tuesday afternoon rain drummed against the windshield as Nicholas Turner guided his pickup truck through the suburban streets of Cedar Falls. His daughter Stephanie sat in the back seat, humming along to some kids' show theme song, her legs swinging beneath her. At 8 years old, she still had that innocence that made Nick's chest tighten with protective instinct every time he looked at her. "Dad, can we stop for ice cream?" Stephanie asked, her voice bright. "Not today, sweetheart. We're running late for Grandpa Roy's." Nick glanced in the rearview mirror and caught his daughter's face falling slightly. Roy Weeks, his father-in-law, had been insisting on these weekly visits ever since Nick's wife Kendra had died 2 years ago in a car accident. The old man claimed he wanted to stay connected to his only grandchild, and Nick had understood. Grief did strange things to people. But lately, something felt off. Nick couldn't put his finger on it at first. Small things. The way Roy would insist on taking Stephanie to the bathroom alone during visits. How he'd installed a new lock on his study door. The camera equipment that seemed to multiply each time Nick visited the sprawling house on Oakmont Drive. "Your grandfather's been asking about you all week," Nick said, forcing lightness into his voice. "I know," Stephanie replied, and something in her tone made Nick's hands tighten on the steering wheel. The Turner family hadn't always been fractured. Nick had met Kendra McCarthy at a community college art class 7 years ago. She'd been sketching the still life with such intense focus that she hadn't noticed him staring. When she finally looked up, her smile had been like sunlight breaking through clouds. They'd married within a year, and Stephanie had arrived 14 months later. Nick worked as a forensic accountant for a mid-sized firm downtown. The kind of job that people found boring at parties until he explained he'd helped bring down a corrupt city councilman and exposed a multi-million-dollar Ponzi scheme. He had a mind that saw patterns where others saw chaos, connections where others saw coincidence. It made him good at his job. It also made him difficult to fool. Roy Weeks was a different story. Retired postal worker, widower for 15 years, he'd lived alone in the family house since Kendra's mother passed. He was 63. With silver hair he kept military short and a ramrod posture that spoke of discipline. He'd been a decent enough father-in-law before Kendra died, distant but polite, the kind of man who showed affection through actions rather than words. After Kendra's death, something had shifted. Roy had become insistent, almost demanding about seeing Stephanie. At first Nick had been grateful. He was drowning in grief and single parenthood, working 60-hour weeks to keep himself from thinking about the empty space in his bed. Roy's involvement had seemed like a blessing. Now, pulling into the driveway of the large colonial house, Nick felt his stomach twist. "Dad?" Stephanie's voice was small. "Do I have to go inside?" Nick turned in his seat, really looking at his daughter for the first time in weeks. She was picking at the hem of her dress, not meeting his eyes. "What's wrong, honey?" "Nothing. I don't feel good." "What kind of not good?" "My tummy hurts." Nick studied her face. No fever, no obvious signs of illness. Just a child who suddenly didn't want to visit her grandfather. "Did something happen the last time you were here?" Stephanie shrugged, still not looking at him. "Grandpa Roy is nice. He gives me cookies. But sometimes he takes pictures of me. Lots of pictures." Nick's blood ran cold. "What kind of pictures?" "Just pictures. He has cameras everywhere now. He says he wants to remember me." The rain intensified, sheeting across the windshield. Nick's mind raced through the past 6 months of visits, cataloging every strange moment he dismissed. Roy's new hobby of photography, the locked study, the way he'd insisted on keeping Stephanie overnight last month, only for her to come home unusually quiet. "Stephanie, I need you to tell me something, and I need you to be completely honest. Has Grandpa Roy ever touched you in a way that made you uncomfortable?" "No," she said quickly, too quickly. "Not like that." "Like what, then?" Stephanie's eyes filled with tears. He knows I sometimes have accidents. You know, when I don't make it to the bathroom in time." Nick's heart hammered. Stephanie had been struggling with occasional bedwetting and daytime accidents since Kendra's death. The pediatrician said it was normal stress response, that she'd outgrow it. They'd been working on it together, Nick cleaning up without shame or anger, making it no big deal. "What about the accidents?" he asked carefully. "Sometimes, when we're here, I have them, And Grandpa Roy, he takes pictures of them. Of my underwear when it's wet. He says it's to help me remember to use the bathroom, but she trailed off, wiping her eyes. It makes me feel bad and weird. The world seemed to tilt. Nick's vision blurred at the edges as rage began building in his chest like a physical force. How many times has this happened? I don't know. Maybe 10, 15? And you didn't tell me? He said not to. He said you'd be mad at me for having accidents. He said it was our secret. Nick's hands trembled as he unbuckled his seatbelt. Every fiber of his being screamed to storm into that house and break Roy Weeks into pieces. But the accountant in him, the part that dealt in evidence and proof, held him back. Stephanie, I need you to stay in the car. Lock the doors. If I'm not back in 10 minutes, you call 911, okay? Dad, what's wrong? Nothing's wrong, baby. I just need to talk to Grandpa Roy about something. Everything's going to be fine. He was lying. Nothing was fine. Nothing would ever be fine again. Nick stepped out into the rain, his dress shoes splashing through puddles as he walked toward the front door. He didn't knock. Roy had given him a key months ago, insisting family should always have access. Nick used it now, pushing the door open to the scent of something cooking in the kitchen. Roy? He called out, his voice leveled despite the storm raging inside him. In here! Roy's voice came from the kitchen, cheerful and unsuspecting. Nick found his father-in-law at the stove, stirring something in a large pot. The old man turned with a smile that died when he saw Nick's face. Where's Stephanie? In the car. Nick's voice was ice. We need to talk. About what? About why you've been taking pictures of my daughter's bathroom accidents. The color drained from Roy's face. The wooden spoon clattered against the pot. I don't know what you're... Don't. Nick held up a hand. Don't insult both of us by lying. She told me everything. Roy's expression shifted, cycling through denial, fear, and then something else. Defiance. I was trying to help her. The child has a problem, Nicholas. Someone needed to address it. By photographing her? By telling her to keep secrets from me. You're too soft on her. You baby her. I was documenting the issue, too. Your phone, Nick interrupted. Where is it? Now wait just a minute. Nick moved fast, crossing the kitchen in 3 strides. He'd never been a violent man, but right now his hands itched to wrap around Roy's throat. Instead, he spotted the phone on the counter and grabbed it. You have no right. Roy reached for it, but Nick twisted away. Give me the code. Absolutely not. Give me the goddamn code, or I'm calling the police right now and letting them search your house. Roy's jaw worked. His eyes darted toward the hallway, toward his locked study. That single glance told Nick everything he needed to know. Fine. Roy spat and rattled off 6 digits. Nick's fingers flew across the screen, opening the photo gallery. What he saw in the first 3 seconds made bile rise in his throat. Dozens of photos. Stephanie in her underwear. Close-ups of wet spots. Timestamps going back months. Some labeled with notes 3:47 p.m. accident. After juice box. Didn't make it again. But there was more. Screenshots of online forums. Saved images from websites Nick recognized from his work on internet crimes task forces. The dark corners of the web where predators traded material. Nothing explicitly illegal yet, but the pattern was clear. The escalation was clear. You sick son of a bitch, Nick whispered. Roy lunged for the phone. Nick sidestepped, and his free hand came up almost on instinct, connecting with Roy's jaw in a sharp right cross that sent the older man stumbling backward into the counter. You have no idea what you've done, Roy snarled, touching his split lip. She's my granddaughter too. I have rights. You have nothing. Nick's voice shook. You're done. He pulled out his own phone with trembling hands and dialed 911. 911. What's your emergency? My name is Nicholas Turner. I'm at 1247 Oakmont Drive. I need to report child exploitation. I've found evidence that my father-in-law has been taking inappropriate photographs of my 8-year-old daughter. Roy's face went from red to white. You're making a mistake? I can explain. The police can hear your explanation, Nick said coldly. The next 72 hours passed in a nightmarish blur. 2 patrol officers arrived within minutes, followed by Detective Viola Gillespie from the Special Victims Unit. She was a woman in her 40s with sharp eyes and a no-nonsense demeanor that Nick immediately appreciated. Roy had tried to play the misunderstood grandfather, but the photos on his phone told a different story. The officers seized his computer, his cameras, his external hard drives. They took Stephanie to be interviewed by specialists trained in child forensics. Nick sat in the waiting room of the police station, his hands clasped between his knees, trying not to imagine what his daughter was going through. When Stephanie emerged 2 hours later, she looked exhausted. The interviewer, a kind-faced woman named Gail Hutchinson, assured Nick that Stephanie had been brave and truthful. "Your daughter is safe," Gail said quietly. "And from what we can tell, the abuse didn't escalate to physical contact. That doesn't make it less serious, but it means we caught this early." "What happens now?" Nick asked. "Detective Gillespie will explain." Viola Gillespie met them in her office, a cramped space that smelled of coffee and stress. She gestured for Nick to sit, while Stephanie colored at a small table in the corner. "Mr. Turner, I'm going to be straight with you. What we found on Roy Weeks's phone is disturbing, but it's in a legal gray area." Nick's stomach dropped. "What do you mean gray area?" "The photographs are inappropriate. Absolutely. But they don't meet the legal definition of child pornography in this state. Your daughter was clothed in all the images. There's no nudity, no sexual posing. He was documenting her bathroom accidents. Collecting them. He had screenshots from, I know what he had. And those screenshots aren't illegal either. Not unless they depict actual illegal content, which these didn't. They were just searches, forum posts, discussions." Viola's expression was grim. "Look, I've been doing this for 16 years. I know a predator when I see one. Roy Weeks was grooming your daughter, building towards something worse. But what we have right now won't get us a conviction on felony charges." "So he walks?" "I didn't say that. We're pursuing charges of child endangerment and invasion of privacy. They're misdemeanors, but there's something. With a good prosecutor and the right judge, we might get him 6 months. Maybe a year, plus mandatory registration as a sex offender." 6 months. Nick's voice cracked. He was planning to use Saw what he was researching. He was building a collection. "This was just the beginning. I know. And that's why I need you to trust me when I say we're going to make the strongest case possible. But you need to prepare yourself for the possibility that the system won't give you the justice you want." Nick drove home in silence, Stephanie asleep in the back seat. When he carried her inside and tucked her into bed, she stirred slightly. "Dad." "Yeah, baby? Am I in trouble?" "No. God, no. You did nothing wrong. None of this is your fault." "Is Grandpa Roy in trouble?" "Yes. He is." "Good." She rolled over, clutching her stuffed rabbit. "I didn't like going there anymore." Nick sat on the edge of her bed until her breathing evened out, then he went downstairs and poured himself 3 fingers of whiskey. He drank it standing at the kitchen sink, staring out at the dark backyard. 6 months. Maybe. If they were lucky. And then what? Roy would be out, registered but free. Free to move, to change his name eventually, to find new victims. The thought made Nick sick. He pulled out his phone and started researching. Sex offender laws, registry requirements, recidivism rates. The more he read, the angrier he became. The system was designed to fail, full of loopholes and technicalities and second chances for people who didn't deserve them. By 3 in the morning, Nick had made a decision. If the law couldn't protect Stephanie, couldn't protect other potential victims, then he would have to do it himself. He began with Roy's financials. As a forensic accountant, Nick had access to databases and tools most people didn't. He started pulling records, looking for patterns, anything he could use. What he found was interesting. Roy Weeks lived comfortably on his postal pension, but there were regular payments to offshore accounts. Small amounts, $200 here, $500 there, all through cryptocurrency exchanges. Nick traced them back through 3 shell companies to a server in Eastern Europe. He knew what that meant. Roy wasn't just collecting photos of Stephanie. He was paying for content, trading it. Part of a network. Nick's hands trembled as he documented everything, creating encrypted backups, building a file that went far beyond what the police had seized. He worked through the night, following digital breadcrumbs that Roy had thought were hidden. By dawn, Nick had enough evidence to prove Roy Weeks was involved in an international child exploitation network. He had transaction records, encrypted chat logs he'd managed to access through a security vulnerability. forum posts under usernames that linked back to Roy's IP address. But he didn't take it to the police. Not yet. Because Nick Turner had learned something important in his years as a forensic accountant. The difference between justice and revenge was often just a matter of timing and presentation. The police would take this evidence and bungle it, lose it in bureaucracy, let some technicality set Roy free. Nick needed to be smarter than that. He needed to destroy Roy Weeks so completely that there would be no comeback, no second chances, no walking away with a slap on the wrist. The arraignment happened on a gray Monday morning. Roy Weeks appeared before Judge Constance Rush with his attorney, a slick defense lawyer named Anthony Yu, who specialized in making problems disappear for people with money. Nick sat in the gallery, watching his father-in-law stand before the bench in an orange jumpsuit. Roy looked smaller somehow, diminished. But when his eyes found Nick's, there was no remorse, just cold calculation. "Your Honor, Anthony," Yu began. "My client is a grieving grandfather who made an error in judgment. There was no criminal intent here. Mr. Weeks was documenting a medical issue with his granddaughter to help her father address it. By taking photographs, without the father's knowledge or consent, Judge Rush cut in, and telling the child to keep secrets. A misunderstanding blown out of proportion by an overreacting parent." Nick's hands balled into fists. He watched Yu spin his narrative, painting Roy as a concerned family member and Nick as hysterical, overly protective. The bail was set at $50,000. Roy posted it within an hour. Outside the courthouse, Detective Gillespie caught up with Nick. "I know that was hard to watch," she said. "He's already got his story straight. He's going to claim he was trying to help. The evidence tells a different story." "Does it?" "Because from where I'm sitting, he's already painting himself as the victim." Viola was quiet for a moment. "Mr. Turner, I need you to promise me something. I need you to let us handle this. I've seen families take matters into their own hands before. It never ends well." Nick met her eyes. "I'm not going to do anything illegal, Detective." It wasn't technically a lie. What Nick had planned existed in a gray area. Just like Roy's crimes, sometimes the law needed help. Over the next 3 weeks, Nick became a ghost. He showed up to work, smiled at his colleagues, took care of Stephanie. But every free moment was spent on his project. He'd made contact with someone through encrypted channels, a hacker who went by the name Wilson Green. Nick didn't know if that was real or an alias, and he didn't care. What mattered was that Wilson had skills Nick needed. "You want me to what?" Wilson's voice crackled through the encrypted call. "I want you to access Roy Weeks' accounts on these forums," Nick said, sending over the information he'd compiled. "I want you to make posts, specific posts. You're trying to set him up. I'm trying to make sure the truth comes out. Everything I'm giving you is real. These are accounts he actually uses. I'm just accelerating the timeline. You know this could backfire on you. If they trace it back, they won't. That's why I'm paying you $15,000. Wilson was quiet for a long moment. "What did this guy do?" "He hurt my daughter. And he's going to hurt other children if someone doesn't stop him." "Okay, I'm in." Over the next week, Roy Weeks' online activity became increasingly reckless. Posts appeared on forums under his usernames, discussing his collection, asking for trades, sharing his methods for grooming children. It was all based on his actual search history and encrypted chats Nick had accessed, just made public. Anonymous tips started flooding into the FBI's cybercrimes division. Screenshots appeared on social media, shared by parental advocacy groups. Roy Weeks' name began trending on local Twitter. The second arrest came on a Wednesday. This time, federal agents showed up at Roy's door with a warrant that extended far beyond the local police department's scope. They seized everything: computers, phones, hard drives, cloud accounts. Nick watched from across the street as they led Roy out in handcuffs. This time, the old man looked terrified. Detective Gillespie called Nick that evening. "Did you have anything to do with this?" she asked without preamble. "With what?" "Don't play games, Mr. Turner. The FBI has evidence that Roy Weeks was actively participating in child exploitation networks. Evidence that mysteriously appeared after his first arrest. I'm just a father trying to protect his daughter, Detective. If the FBI found evidence, that's their job." "Nick," her voice softened, "I understand what you're feeling. But if you've done something illegal, I haven't touched him. I haven't threatened him. I've been home taking care of my daughter and going to work. You can check my phone records, my credit cards, anything you want." It was all true. Nick had been meticulous about covering his tracks. Everything he'd done had been through encrypted channels, paid for in cryptocurrency, routed through VPNs in 6 different countries. Wilson Green didn't know his real name or location. The evidence against Roy was real, just curated. The next morning, Nick found a surprise visitor at his door. Anthony Yu, Roy's defense attorney. "Mr. Turner, I think we should talk." Nick considered slamming the door in his face. Instead, he stepped onto the porch, pulling the door closed behind him. Stephanie didn't need to hear this. "What do you want?" "My client wants to make a deal." "With me?" "I'm not the prosecutor." "No, but you have influence." Roy believes, and I tend to agree, that someone has been orchestrating his downfall. Someone with the skills to access his private accounts and make him look worse than he is. Nick's expression didn't change. "That sounds like paranoia talking." "Does it?" "Because the FBI's evidence is almost too perfect. Every damning post, every transaction, all conveniently coming to light right after his first arrest." Anthony Yu stepped closer, lowering his voice. "Roy knows what he did to your daughter was wrong. He's willing to plead guilty to the original charges, accept the maximum sentence, and never contact you or Stephanie again. In exchange, you stop whatever campaign you're running." "I'm not running any campaign." "Mr. Turner, your client is a child predator who was caught. If the FBI found evidence of his crimes, that's because he committed them. I had nothing to do with it." Nick opened his door. "And there's no deal. I want him in prison for as long as possible. Tell him to save his breath." He went inside and locked the door, his heart hammering. They suspected, but they couldn't prove anything. That night, Nick made his final move. He'd been saving the worst of what he'd found evidence of Roy's involvement with an organized network that traded content internationally. Nick had traced connections to 3 other men in the surrounding states, all part of the same group. He compiled everything into a comprehensive file. Financial records, chat logs, forum posts, both real and Wilson's editions, IP addresses, cryptocurrency wallets, and a detailed map of the network. Then he sent it anonymously to the FBI's Innocent Images National Initiative, the National Center for Missing and Exploited Children, and an investigative journalist named Sean Gregory, who specialized in exposing child predators. Within 48 hours, Sean Gregory published an expose that went viral. "Local grandfather linked to International Child Exploitation Network," read the headline. The article detailed Roy Weeks' activities, his connections to other predators, and the FBI's ongoing investigation. The community erupted. Protests appeared outside Roy's house. His neighbors started a petition to force him out. Someone spray-painted "Predator" across his garage door. Roy's bail was revoked. He was moved to federal custody pending trial. And Nick Turner went back to being a concerned father, cooperating fully with authorities, expressing shock and horror at each new revelation about his father-in-law's crimes. But he wasn't done yet, because Nick had learned something else in his investigation. Roy Weeks wasn't working alone. He had a friend, another retired postal worker named Elias Aguirre, who shared his proclivities. They'd been protecting each other for years, trading content, covering each other's tracks. Nick began building a second file. The trial began on a bitter cold morning in February. Nick had arranged for Stephanie to stay with his sister, Teresa Reed, 3 states away. She didn't need to be here for this. Roy Weeks looked haggard as he was led into the federal courtroom. 6 months of jail awaiting trial had aged him a decade. His attorney had tried for a plea deal, but the prosecutor, a fierce woman named Kelly Mackey, wanted blood. The evidence was overwhelming. Financial records showing thousands of dollars in payments to dark websites, forum posts discussing his activities, the photographs of Stephanie that had started it all, testimony from digital forensics experts about his deleted files and encrypted communications. Anthony Yu tried his best, arguing entrapment, suggesting someone had framed his client, questioning the chain of custody on certain pieces of evidence. But the jury wasn't buying it. Nick sat through every day of the trial, watching his father-in-law's life unravel thread by thread. He felt no satisfaction, no triumph, just a cold, hard certainty that this was necessary. On the 7th day, Detective Gillespie slid into the seat beside him during a recess. "We arrested Elias Aguirre this morning," she said quietly. Nick's heart rate spiked, but he kept his face neutral. Roy's friend? Turns out they were more than friends. Partners in crime. We found evidence on Roy's seized computers, communications. Between them, shared files. Aguirre had a similar collection to Roy's. Mostly his neighbor's kids. Viola paused. Funny thing though, the tip that led us to look deeper at Aguirre came from an anonymous source. Very detailed, very thorough. Almost like someone had been investigating him independently. Sounds like good police work to me, detective. That's what I told my captain. She stood to leave, then turned back. Mr. Turner? I don't know what you did or didn't do, but between you and me, some monsters deserve whatever happens to them. The verdict came back after 4 hours of deliberation. Guilty on all counts. Roy Weeks was sentenced to 18 years in federal prison. With his age and health, it was effectively a life sentence. Nick watched the bailiffs lead him away. Roy's eyes found his one last time, and there was understanding there. He knew Nick had orchestrated this. He knew, but he could never prove it. 2 weeks later, Nick received a call from an unknown number. Mr. Turner, this is Philip Downs. I'm an investigator with the FBI's Crimes Against Children Division. Nick's blood ran cold. Yes, I wanted to thank you personally. The information you provided anonymously, of course, led to the arrest of 7 individuals across 4 states. We've identified 12 victims who are now safe. It's some of the most comprehensive investigative work we've seen from a civilian source. I'm not sure what you're talking about. Of course you're not. There was amusement in Downs's voice. Let me be clear, Mr. Turner. If someone had, hypothetically, accessed private accounts without authorization or manipulated online evidence, that would be illegal. We'd have to investigate. Nick said nothing. But, Downs continued, since all the evidence we received was accurate and verifiable, and since it led to the arrest of dangerous predators, we're not particularly interested in looking too closely at the source. Do you understand what I'm saying? I think so. Good. Take care of your daughter, Mr. Turner. You're a good father. The line went dead. Nick stood in his kitchen, holding the silent phone, feeling the weight of the past months settle over him. He'd bent the law, broken it really, used his skills to manipulate evidence and destroy a man's life. But Roy Weeks had deserved it, and more importantly, Stephanie was safe. A year passed. Stephanie started therapy and slowly began to heal. The nightmares faded. The accidents stopped. She smiled more, laughed more, started making friends at school again. Nick kept tabs on the case, following the network he'd helped expose. Elias Aguirre got 12 years. 3 others were sentenced to similar terms. The judge in Roy's case had been particularly harsh, noting the betrayal of family trust and the premeditated nature of his crimes. Then one evening, Nick received a letter. The return address was the federal correctional facility where Roy was housed. He almost threw it away, but curiosity won. Inside was a single page, handwritten in Roy's careful script. Nicholas, I know what you did. I know how you set me up, how you manipulated the evidence, how you destroyed me. You're clever. I'll give you that. Cleverer than I gave you credit for. But here's the thing you don't understand. I'm not the monster you think I am. I love Stephanie. I would never have hurt her. Those photos were about helping her, documenting a problem, so you'd finally address it properly. You're too soft on that girl. You always have been. What you did to me was wrong. You fabricated evidence. You ruined an innocent man's life. And someday, somehow, the truth will come out. People will see that I was trying to help my granddaughter, and you were just a paranoid, vindictive father who couldn't handle someone else caring about his child. I hope you can live with yourself, Roy. Nick read it 3 times, then walked to the fireplace and fed it to the flames. He watched the paper curl and blacken, Roy's words turning to ash. The man still didn't get it, still believed his own lies, still thought he was the victim. Good. Let him spend the next 18 years in his cell, believing he'd been wronged. Let him die in prison, clinging to that delusion. Because the truth was simple. Nick Turner had protected his daughter. He'd stopped a predator. He'd dismantled a network. And if he'd had to become something darker to do it, if he'd had to compromise his own ethics and break laws he'd once respected, that was a price he was willing to pay. Stephanie came downstairs then, holding her backpack. Dad, can you help me with my math homework? Of course, sweetheart. She settled at the kitchen table, pulling out worksheets covered in multiplication problems. Nick sat beside her, patient and encouraging, helping her work through each equation. This was what mattered. Not Roy, not the trial, not the legal and moral lines he'd crossed. Just this. A little girl doing homework at the kitchen table, safe in her own home, with a father who would burn the world down before he let anyone hurt her again. 3 months later, Nick received a final call from Detective Gillespie. "Thought you'd want to know," she said. "Roy Weeks was attacked in prison yesterday. Inmates found out what he was in for. He's in the hospital with a broken jaw and 3 cracked ribs." Nick felt nothing. Will he survive? Yeah. Unfortunately for him. You said, unfortunately. I said what I said. Viola sighed. Look, Turner, I've been doing this job long enough to know that sometimes the system works and sometimes it doesn't. And sometimes people like you have to step in and make sure justice gets done. Off the record, I'm glad you did what you did. Those kids are safe because of you. I didn't do anything except protect my daughter. Sure, keep telling yourself that. Her voice softened. How is Stephanie? She's good, really good. She made the soccer team. Started taking piano lessons. She's going to be okay. That's all that matters then. After they hung up, Nick went to check on Stephanie. She was in her room, practicing scales on her keyboard, her tongue sticking out in concentration the way Kendra's used to. She looked up when she saw him in the doorway and smiled. Want to hear what I learned today? Always. She played a simple melody, hitting most of the notes correctly, beaming with pride when she finished. That was beautiful, Nick said, and meant it. Mrs. Holloway says, I'm a natural. I bet you are. He sat on the edge of her bed while she continued practicing, watching his daughter reclaim her childhood piece by piece. The shadows Roy Weeks had cast over her life were fading, replaced by music and laughter and dreams about the future. Nick had won. He protected his daughter, destroyed a monster, and exposed a network of predators. He'd done it by becoming something he never thought he could be, someone willing to operate in the gray, to bend rules, to fight dirty. But looking at Stephanie now, humming along to her music, he knew he'd do it all again in a heartbeat. Some battles couldn't be won by playing fair. Some monsters needed to be fought with their own weapons. And Nicholas Turner had proven he was more than capable of becoming the monster that monsters feared. Roy Weeks would spend the rest of his life in a cage, branded a predator, facing the violence and hatred of his fellow inmates every single day. His name was ruined, his legacy destroyed, his crimes exposed for the world to see. Meanwhile, Nick would continue being a father, going to soccer games and piano recitals, helping with homework, building a life for his daughter that was safe and full of possibility. That was the real victory. Not the trial, not the sentence, not the revenge. Just a little girl growing up happy and safe, unaware of the lengths her father had gone to protect her. And that was worth everything. There you have it. Another story comes to an end. What did you think? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments below. If you enjoy this story, consider joining our community by subscribing. It means the world to us. For more stories like this one, check out the recommended videos on screen. And I'll see you there.